This is Algebra 2. This is lesson 72. We're not going to do part A on experimental data. All right? We're not covering experimental data this year. We will cover it next year. So part A, we're not looking at. Part B is negative angles with vectors. So I want to remind us with vectors. When we rotate the vector, remember we always begin rotating the vector from the positive x-axis. And when we rotate it counterclockwise, our angle is positive. So we go from 0. We go from 0 to 90 to 180 to 270, all the way back to 360. That's when we rotate counterclockwise. When we rotate clockwise, we're now going to have negative angles. So clockwise is positive. Counterclockwise is positive. Clockwise is negative. So when I rotate it in this direction, we're going to be negative. So we're going to go 0, negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, all the way back around to negative 360. So you have to look and see where your angle is. Always, always draw your vector. All right, so we're going to start with example 72.2. And we want to write it, it's given in polar form. We want to write it in rectangular form. So 4 at negative 200, 4 at negative 210 degrees. All right, so we have to decide what quadrant is that in. We're going to go 0, we're at negative 90, we're at negative 180. Up here, somewhere up here, is going to be negative 210. All right. Remember that the length of my vector is 4. That's the magnitude of the vector. The angle is always from that positive x-axis. But I find my R value, which we know it's negative. My U value is going to be positive because of the quadrant that it's in. But I always use this angle to solve for the value of R and the value of U. Remembering R relates to cosine, U relates to the sine. Your X value, your X coordinate always is associated with cosine. Your Y value always associated with the sine. Glad I have my calculator. All right, but I have to decide the angle. The angle is going to be this angle here, which is the distance from 210 to 180. So I subtracted 210 minus 180. Or how far do I have to go from 180 to get to 210? And that's 30 degrees. Now remember, if I'm using a 45-45-90 or a 30-60-90, I'm always using my Pythagorean triplets. Remember, the 45-45-90 is 1 square root of 2. The 30-60-90 is 1 square root of 3, 2. So I'm going to use my Pythagorean triplet. For this one, I'm not going to use my calculator. The side opposite 30 is 1. The side opposite 60 is square root of 3. And the hypotenuse is 2. So this is easy. To go from the hypotenuse to the U value, I just take half. Remember, we always go back to the side opposite 30 degrees. I take half. So my U value is going to be positive 2U. Then to get to my R value, which is opposite the 60 degrees, I take this side and I just multiply it by square root of 3. So it's going to be negative 2 square root of 3 R. And that is the coordinate points. Do not write this in decimal form if it's a 45-45-90 or a 30-60-90 triangle. Okay? Leave it in this form. All right, that is the only example for this one, but this is the only part of this lesson that we will do. So you will not work problem 6. All right, now let's just look a little bit more at this. Let's suppose that I have an angle that is 5 at negative 50. I start out at 0, that's negative 90. I'm rotating this direction. It's here. My angle is 50 degrees. All right? The length is 5. My R is going to be positive. My U will be negative. I use the cosine to solve for R. R is 5 times the cosine of 50 degrees. U, remembering it's going to be negative, is going to be 5 times the sine of 50 degrees. All right, now let's put one. We've got one in the first quadrant. We've done one in the third quadrant. What about if I have 2 at negative 120 degrees? That's 0, negative 90, negative 180. Negative 120 is between 90 and 180. So it's going to be here at negative 120 degrees. My R will be negative. My U will be negative. The length of the vector magnitude is 2. This angle is the difference between 120 and 180. It will be a 60-degree angle. Because it's a 30, 60, 90, I would use the Pythagorean triplet. Opposite 30, that's 1. Square root of 3, 2. To get to this one, to get to that leg, the shortest leg, I take half of the hypotenuse. All right, so I'm looking at this distance, 120 to 180, in the second, it's really the third quadrant, for a negative angle. For a negative angle that ends up in your second quadrant, I'm looking at that distance, 180 to 210, all right? Now let's put one in the first quadrant, a negative angle in the first quadrant. So it could be 6 at negative 290 degrees. That would be in the third quadrant. We have 0, negative 90, negative 180, negative 270. So 290, negative 290 is going to be here. But what is this angle? I look at the distance from 290 to 360, and that's 70 degrees. So this angle would be 70 degrees, right? My R is positive, my U is positive. All right, so this lesson is dealing with negative angles, rotating them clockwise, and solving for that angle so that you can calculate your R and your U, your rectangular coordinates.